Hi everybody, I'm back with another review. This review is going to be my first of the RPG Classic series that I mentioned in my intro video. So let's get to it, shall we? This game is, if there was a RPG Hall of Fame, this would absolutely be at the very center of it. This is the Star Wars role-playing game by West End Games. This is sort of like my holy grail of role-playing games. It wasn't actually the very first role-playing game I ever played, but it was the first role-playing game that I ever bought for myself. It was the first role-playing game that I actually game mastered for, and it was really where I really started to get into role-playing games, was with this very book. In fact, this very copy of this very book. I bought this when it first came out, which was back in August of '96, and have been having fun with this game ever since. Virtually, I wouldn't say nonstop, but any chance I get, this is the game that I like to run. So a little information about this. It invites confusion with, but should not be confused with, the Star Wars role-playing game D20 version and the Star Wars Saga Edition role-playing game, both released by Wizards of the Coast. This edition is commonly referred to as Star Wars D6, and it was originally released in its first edition back in 1987 at the 10th anniversary of the original release of the first Star Wars film. And it's been through two editions and a revision, and I'll go into that a little bit later. But this copy that I'm holding is called Second Edition Revised and Expanded, and it was the last version of the game that was released before West End Games kind of went under and the game went out of print. They lost the license to publish the Star Wars role-playing game, and so it kind of has fallen away. This game has been out of print now since about 1998 was the last time West End Games published any source books for it. It used the patented system from West End Games, which was known as the D6 system, which is a very simple system of using six-sided dice for all of your rolls. There's no other types of dice that the game uses. And essentially what happens is you have attributes and skills. And you have, in Star Wars, you have 6 attributes governing strength, dexterity, knowledge, perception, and 2 attributes unique to Star Wars called mechanical and technical. And the others are pretty self-explanatory, but where mechanical and technical fit into the game system is mechanical is your character's ability to operate machinery, vehicles, and starships, and technical is your ability to repair those droids and vehicles, starships, and other technology. And so the way that the game's core game system works is that each of your attributes is rated by a number of dice. And so, for example, you might have a dexterity attribute of 3D, or 3 dice. So whenever you do something related to dexterity, you would roll 3 six-sided dice, you add them together to get a total, and you compare that against a difficulty number. That is the very core of the Star Wars role-playing game, is the simple concept of roll your dice, add them up, and compare them to a difficulty number. If you equal or exceed the difficulty, your action was a success. So each attribute governs different skills. So for example, you have the blaster skill, which is your character's ability to use blaster weapons, and that's a dexterity skill. So every skill that's associated with an attribute defaults to the level of the attribute that it is tied to. So if you had an unimproved blaster skill and your character's dexterity is 3 dice, anytime you use a blaster you would roll 3 dice. But your characters get skill points that they can spend on specializing in certain skills. So if you specialize in the blaster skill, for example, if you end up spending 2 skill dice in blaster, you add the skill dice that you spent on the skill to the skill dice of the attribute that governs it, and that's the total number of dice that you roll when you're using that skill. So if you have a dexterity of 3 dice and you want to spend 2 points to increase your blaster skill. Your blaster skill is now 3 plus 2, or 5d, 5 dice. So anytime you use a blaster, you roll 5 six-sided dice, add them up, and the result is, again, going against a difficulty or going against an opponent's skill roll. And it really doesn't get much more complicated than that. And this is one of the very few truly streamlined systems where the same set of rules pretty much governs everything that the game does. There are a couple of other add-on bits which are make it into the Star Wars experience. You have character points, which are interesting because they act as both your character's experience points, both for spending them to increase your skills, but also the character points can be invoked during the game, sort of like, maybe bennies or action points or drama points in other systems, where each character point that you spend allows you to roll an extra six-sided die with whatever skill that you're using. And they represent, a really minor kind of element of extra luck, that maybe your character is really lucky, or maybe, your character is subtly being kind of guided by the Force in his actions. On the more potent side, you have something called force points, and force points are much harder to come by. They're much more rare, they're much more difficult to obtain, but they're much more powerful. When you spend a force point on your character's actions, for every roll that you make in a round in which you spend a force point, all of your dice are doubled. So if normally you would be rolling 4 skill dice on some action, and if you spent a force point for that turn, suddenly you're rolling 8 skill dice. It only lasts for a single turn, so it's just one of those. It's like when Luke really needs to shoot a proton torpedo down a 2-meter wide shaft at the end of the trench of the Death Star, and he really needs to succeed at this task. He can spend a force point for it, and he gets a huge big boost so that it can help him make that dramatic moment, that he can make that action count. The game is packed with everything that you would need. This single book itself is packed with everything that you would need to play Star Wars for many years of adventures. It includes alien races, of course, and starships and weapons and droids and all this kind of stuff. But it's got really good, some of the best game master tips for any role-playing game that I've seen, simply because at the heart of the Star Wars D6 role-playing game is the concept that the rules are only guidelines, that the game master should only be using the rules if they make the game more fun. Anytime, they specifically call this out at several points, but they say anytime that the rules get in the way of the fun, get rid of them. Also, they stress that this is really just their concepts of just showing you some of the interior of the books here. That any time that you would get you come across a rule rather that you don't like, or that doesn't really mesh with your line of thinking, or that doesn't work for your game, they say just ignore it. It's not important. We only put the rules in here that we thought of, that we saw and wanted to include, but that doesn't mean that you have to use them. And in fact, the entire game is very flexible, because it really just boils down to grab a bunch of dice, pick a skill, roll it, compare it to a difficulty number, and if you get higher, you succeed. If you get lower, you fail. And it really harps on that. It really tells the game master that, hey, this is your game, you're in control, and don't let the rules run the game for you. So it's an excellent game. I have been in love with this game since I first found it. I quickly abandoned the first role-playing game that I ever played was Dungeons & Dragons. Not that Dungeons & Dragons is bad. I loved it. I had a lot of fun with it. I still have fun with it to this day. But the minute I discovered that they were publishing a Star Wars role-playing game, I had to have it. I ran out and bought it and wanted to run it instantly. it can be difficult to find, but I realize that I'm going to run over a little bit, so I'm going to do a second parter to this. So I'll be back with in a moment for the conclusion to this review.